They mocked me for living simply. Then the bank mistakenly sent my $18 million balance to the family group chat. I didn't say a word. I just sat back and watched as their true colors came out. By the time I was done, their mansions were empty, and they were begging for my forgiveness. But first, please subscribe to this channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. It started with a simple text message that changed everything. I was sitting on my worn but comfortable porch swing, enjoying my morning coffee from the same chipped mug I'd used for 15 years. The spring breeze carried the scent of my modest vegetable garden across the yard of my small ranch house in Oakdale, Nebraska. Nothing fancy, just a simple home that had served me well since Martha passed 7 years ago. My phone buzzed beside me. Another notification from the family group chat my daughter-in-law Vanessa had created. I rarely participated, mostly just watched from a distance as my 3 children and their spouses shared photos of exotic vacations and new luxury purchases, things I'd never prioritized in my 72 years of life. But this notification was different. The preview showed an automated message from First National Bank of Omaha. Odd, I thought. I kept my banking private. I opened the chat and froze. Automated account alert. James Wilson, account number 4721. Your current balance of $18,479,352.16 is above your notification threshold. Please contact customer service with questions. The message sat there in the family group chat, exposed for all to see. My heart pounded in my chest. For 45 years, I'd kept my wealth carefully hidden. I lived modestly, drove an old pickup, shopped at discount stores, and never flashed a dime. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. Because the lessons my father taught me about the value of simplicity had shaped my entire life. But now, in an instant, my carefully guarded secret was out. The chat exploded immediately. Dad, what the hell? My son Michael typed first. Is this some kind of joke? There must be a mistake, added my daughter Rebecca. I'm calling Dad right now, wrote my youngest, Sarah. I set the phone down carefully on the porch railing and took a slow sip of my coffee. The phone started ringing, Sarah calling as promised. I silenced it and watched a cardinal land on my bird feeder, the one I'd built by hand rather than buying the fancy ceramic one Vanessa had suggested last Christmas. My phone lit up with text after text, then emails, then more calls. I ignored them all. It wasn't a mistake. The money was real. Every penny earned through decades of careful investment after selling my construction company at age 50. But they didn't need to know that yet. For years, they'd mocked my cheap lifestyle, made fun of my second-hand clothes, my refusal to upgrade my TV, my preference for home-cooked meals over fancy restaurants. They'd rolled their eyes when I gave them practical gifts instead of extravagant ones. Dad's just stuck in the past, they'd say when they thought I couldn't hear. He could afford better if he wanted to. Michael would tell his friends with embarrassment in his voice, Grandpa's house smells like old people. My granddaughter, Lily, had whispered to her mother once, loud enough for me to catch. I hadn't bothered explaining my choices, that I found joy in simplicity, that watching my children become increasingly materialistic broke my heart, that I'd been waiting for them to appreciate what truly mattered in life. Now the truth was out, and I had a decision to make. I finally picked up my phone and typed a single message to the group. Not a mistake. Please respect my privacy while I deal with this security breach. Then I turned off my phone completely, walked inside my modest home, and began to plan. Now I would see who my children really were, and they would learn exactly what happens when you judge a book by its cover. Martha and I never started out with money. We married young. I was 22 and she was 20. Both of us came from farming families where hard work was valued above all else. I still remember our first apartment, a one-bedroom walk-up above Donaldson's Hardware. The bathroom sink leaked, the floors creaked, and we could hear every argument from the couple next door. But we were happy. I worked construction during the day and took business classes at community college 3 nights a week. Martha waitressed and saved every penny she could. We had a clear plan. Save enough to start our own business. It took 7 years, but we finally did it. Wilson Construction began with just me, 2 hired workers, and a used truck. The kids came along as the business grew. First Michael, our strong-willed boy who seemed determined to run before he could walk. Then Rebecca, 2 years later, thoughtful and observant from the day she was born. Sarah arrived 5 years after that. Unexpected but instantly beloved. We raised them in that same small house I still live in. Nothing fancy, but it had a big backyard where they could play, and enough room for everyone to have their own space. Martha and I agreed on how we wanted to raise them to value hard work, to appreciate what they had, and to understand that material things weren't what made life worthwhile. "We won't spoil them," Martha would say. "They need to learn to make their own way." And for a while, they did. Michael worked summer jobs through high school. Rebecca babysat and saved for her own car. Sarah helped Martha with her small catering business. But something changed as they grew older and Wilson. Construction became more successful. By the time Michael was in college, we were handling major commercial projects across 3 states. Money was no longer tight. We could afford nice things. Still, Martha and I stuck to our values. We upgraded the house a little. New appliances, better insulation, a proper patio in the back, but we didn't move to a mansion or buy luxury cars. We put money away for the kids' education and invested the rest. "We're stewards, not owners," Martha would say. "This money is a responsibility." When Martha got sick, breast cancer, that moved too quickly for treatment to catch up, things changed again. The kids were adults by then, all with families of their own. Michael had joined the business but seemed more interested in the paycheck than the work. Rebecca had married Todd, a financial advisor who drove a BMW and talked constantly about status. Sarah had fallen in with Vanessa's crowd, women who lunched, shopped, and judged others by their designer labels. Martha fought hard for 18 months. In her final weeks, she made me promise something. "James," she'd said, her voice barely a whisper as she held my hand, "don't let them lose their way. The money, it can destroy everything we taught them. Be careful." After she passed, I honored that promise. I sold the business not to Michael, who wanted it handed to him, but to my longtime foreman who actually valued what we'd built. The sale brought in just over $8 million. Combined with our savings and investments, I suddenly had nearly $11 million, and I told no one. Instead, I set up trusts for each grandchild's education. I made anonymous donations to the hospital that had cared for Martha. I invested carefully and watched the money grow even more. And I continued to live simply, finding peace in my garden, in woodworking, in the quiet life Martha and I had always valued. But my children changed without Martha's grounding presence. Michael moved his family to a sprawling house in the expensive part of town, stretching himself thin with mortgage payments and country club dues. "Dad, you need to update this place," he'd say during his increasingly rare visits. "It's embarrassing when my friends ask where you live." Rebecca and Todd became fixtures in the local social scene, their social media accounts filled with photos from charity galas and golf tournaments. "We're having the Robertsons over on Saturday," Rebecca would tell me. "They're very particular, so maybe you could come another time." Sarah and her husband bought a vacation home they could barely afford, then complained constantly about financial stress. "If only we had Mom's inheritance," Sarah once said within earshot. "Dad's just sitting on it, living like it doesn't exist." Little did they know, the invitations to family gatherings became more conditional. I was welcome for informal dinners but asked not to attend when important guests were present. I was invited to grandchildren's school events but subtly encouraged to maybe wear something nicer. I received Christmas gifts of expensive clothes I never asked for, with gift receipts prominently attached. "Dad just refuses to keep up appearances," Michael once said at a family barbecue, thinking I was still inside the house. "It's like he enjoys looking poor." I didn't correct them. I didn't explain that my net worth had grown to over $18 million while they stretched themselves thin trying to appear wealthy. I didn't point out that my paid-off house and 10-year-old truck gave me more security than their leveraged lifestyles. Instead, I watched and waited, wondering if they'd ever remember the values we'd raised them with, wondering if Martha's fears had come true despite my best efforts. Until today, when a bank's technical error laid bare the truth as evening fell on that first day, I sat in my living room looking at old photo albums, pictures of 3 smiling children who once valued family beach trips over designer clothes, who once made handcrafted birthday gifts with more enthusiasm than they now selected overpriced store-bought ones. My phone remained off, charging on the kitchen counter. I knew what would be waiting when I turned it on: demands for explanations, accusations of deception, and suddenly, undoubtedly, requests for help. Tomorrow would be soon enough to face that storm. Tonight, I needed to prepare, because this unexpected revelation wasn't just a challenge, it was an opportunity. An opportunity to finally see my children's true characters, and perhaps, just perhaps, a last chance to help them find their way back to the values that mattered. I closed the photo album and reached for the notepad beside my chair. It was time to make a plan. By morning, I had 37 missed calls, 62 text messages, and 15 emails. I scrolled through them as I sipped my coffee, watching the progression from shock to curiosity to calculated interest. The first messages were variants of disbelief. Dad, call me back immediately. What's going on with this bank message? There must be some mistake. $18 million. Please call. Dad, are you okay? I'm worried about you. Call me. But by late evening, the tone had shifted. If this is real, we need to talk about financial planning. Todd can help. I've been thinking about expanding my business. We should discuss investment opportunities. The kids' college funds could really use a boost. Dad, when can we meet? I set the phone down and walked to my garage. My morning routine wouldn't change just because my children had discovered I wasn't poor. I still had tomato plants to stake in my garden, and a leaky faucet to fix. Simple tasks that gave me purpose. Around noon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't surprised to find all three of my children standing on my porch. Michael, in an expensive suit despite it being Saturday. Rebecca with her hair freshly done. Sarah clutching her designer handbag like a shield. Dad, Michael said as I opened the door, not waiting for a greeting. We need to talk. I nodded and stepped aside to let them in. They filed past me. Their expressions a mix of concern and something else. Something calculating. Can I get anyone coffee? I asked, heading toward the kitchen. We don't need coffee, Dad, Rebecca said. We need answers. I poured myself a cup anyway, taking my time. Then I joined them in the living room, settling into my old recliner while they perched uncomfortably on the couch and love seat they'd been trying to convince me to replace for years. So, I said simply, you have questions. Is it true? Michael asked, do you really have $18 million? Yes. The single word hung in the air. I watched them exchange glances. Ha, Sarah finally asked. Where did it come from? I sold the business for more than you thought, I explained. I invested well. I lived within my means. It adds up. For 15 years, you've let us think you were just getting by, Michael said, his voice rising. While we've been working our asses off, stretching ourselves thin, did I ever ask any of you for money? I interrupted. Did I ever complain about my circumstances? That's not the point, Rebecca said. You watched us struggle with mortgages, with kids' tuition, with country club memberships. I finished for her. With luxury cars and designer clothes. Were those struggles, Rebecca? Or choices? Her face flushed. That's unfair. Is it? I set my coffee down. Let me ask you something. When was the last time any of you invited me to dinner just to enjoy my company? Not because you felt obligated, not on a holiday, but just because you wanted to spend time with your father. Silence fell across the room. Dad, Sarah finally said, her voice gentler than the others. We've always loved you. We didn't understand why you lived this way when you apparently didn't have to. I live this way because it makes me happy. I said simply. The question is why my choices bothered you all so much. Michael leaned forward, adapting quickly. Look, what's done is done. The point is, we should talk about estate planning, about maybe making some family investments together. Todd has some excellent. No, I said. Michael blinked. What? No, I repeated. I'm not interested in family investment opportunities right now. But Dad, Rebecca jumped in. You're 72. You need to think about the future, about inheritance taxes, about your inheritance. I asked quietly. Another uncomfortable silence. That's not what she meant, Michael said, but his eyes slid away from mine. I stood up slowly. I think we're done for today. I have some gardening to finish. You're gardening? Michael's voice dripped with disbelief. We've just found out you're secretly a multimillionaire, and you're worried about your tomatoes. The tomatoes bring me joy, I said simply. They don't ask anything of me except water and sunlight. They don't judge me for my old clothes or my simple house. We don't judge you. Dad, Sarah protested, but even she couldn't maintain eye contact. Last Christmas, I said quietly, you all pitched in to buy me a gift card to Brooks Brothers because, and I quote, Dad needs to stop dressing like he shops at Goodwill. 2 months ago, you excluded me from Lily's birthday party because you were afraid I'd embarrass her in front of her friends' parents. And just last week, Michael, you told your son not to end up like Grandpa when he said he might want to work in construction. Their faces showed. I'd hit home with each example. We didn't mean, Rebecca started. You did mean it, I corrected her gently. You meant every word. For years, you've been embarrassed by me, by my house, my clothes, my truck, my lifestyle. You thought I couldn't afford better, but the truth is, I didn't want better. I wanted exactly what I have. I walked to the door and opened it. I think you all should go home and think about why my bank balance suddenly makes me worthy of your pretension." They left reluctantly, tossing promises to call and talk more when I'd calmed down. I closed the door behind them and returned to my garden. But my peace was gone. Now the real test would begin. The text messages started within the hour. "Michael, Dad, I've been thinking about expanding my contracting business. With some capital investment, I could really grow something you'd be proud of. Maybe $500,000 to start. We could discuss terms whenever you're ready. Rebecca, Todd and I found the perfect vacation property in Aspen. Great investment opportunity, but we need to move fast. Looking for about $750,000, amazing returns potential. Call me. Sarah, the kids' private school tuition is really stretching us thin. Dad, if you could help with that $45,000 a year for both, it would make such a difference. Also, our roof needs replacing. Probably $30,000, love you." I read each message without responding, saving screenshots to a folder I'd created called evidence. Then I turned off my phone again and picked up my old address book. There were calls I needed to make, but not to my children. First, I needed to speak with Frank Martinez, my attorney of 30 years, then Diane Williams at the bank, and finally, Harold Thompson, an old friend who now worked as a private investigator. The wheels were about to be set in motion. Over the next week, a pattern emerged. Each morning, I'd turn on my phone to find new messages from my children, each one more transparent than the last about their desire for my money, each one thinly disguising greed as concern for my well-being or as opportunities we could explore together. I responded minimally, never committing to anything but never explicitly refusing either. I was gathering information, building a complete picture of who they had become. Michael invited me to dinner at his country club, where he coincidentally seated me next to his business partner. Throughout the meal, they tag-teamed me with a pitch about expanding into luxury home development. "We just need initial capital," Michael explained, swirling his $200 bottle of wine. "About $2 million. The returns would be massive." "What do you think, Dad?" he pressed when I remained quiet. I said carefully. "That's a lot of money to risk in this housing market." His partner jumped in quickly. "It's actually very low risk, Mr. Wilson. We have pre-orders already lined up." "Really?" I asked. "For homes that haven't been designed yet, from a company with no track record in luxury development." Michael's smile tightened. "We have a solid business plan. I'd love to see it," I said, "along with your financial projections, market analysis, and the pre-order agreements." The conversation shifted quickly to safer topics. Rebecca's approach was different, but equally transparent. She invited me to lunch at an upscale restaurant where the host greeted her by name. "I've been thinking, Dad," she said after ordering a $30 salad, "you're living in that big house all alone. It can't be easy to maintain at your age." "I manage just fine," I replied, sipping my water. "But you shouldn't have to manage," she pressed. "Todd and I have been looking at some wonderful senior living communities. Very exclusive, very comfortable." "Senior living?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'm 72, not 92. It's about quality of life," she continued smoothly. "These places have everything. Golf courses, fine dining, social activities with people of your caliber." "My caliber," I repeated. "You know what I mean," she said, looking slightly uncomfortable. "People who understand your financial position now. And what would happen to my house in this scenario?" I asked. She hesitated just a moment too long. "Well, you wouldn't need it anymore. We could sell it, or maybe convert it to a rental property. Todd knows an excellent property management company." "I see," I said. "And who would manage the proceeds from these arrangements?" "We could help, of course," she said quickly. "With your assets, you need proper management. Todd deals with high net worth clients every day." "How interesting," I said. "That last year when I mentioned considering financial advice, you told me Todd's firm only handled serious investors with portfolios over $1 million. She flushed deeply. "I didn't know then. About your situation." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." Sarah's approach was the most emotional. She arrived at my house unannounced, children in tow, tears ready to spill. "Dad, I hate to ask," she said as the kids played in my backyard, "but Jason's business is really struggling. And with the kids' tuition and the house payments, how much are you short?" I asked directly. She named a figure that would have been shocking if I hadn't already investigated her finances through Harold. The amount was almost exactly what they needed to cover not just essentials but also their Vail ski trip booked for winter. the new SUV Jason had his eye on, and the country club membership they were waitlisted for. That's a lot of money, Sarah, I said gently. I know, she sniffled. We've just been under so much pressure. The kids have opportunities we never had. Dad, they deserve the best schools, the best activities. They're wonderful children, I agreed. Watching them play with the simple wooden train set I'd built years ago, they seemed to be having fun with toys that cost me about $10 in materials. She missed my point entirely. They're just being polite. At home, they have the latest everything. And is that making them happier? Better people? She looked confused. That's not the point. It's about giving them advantages. Like the advantages you had growing up in a modest home with parents who loved you. She didn't have an answer for that. As the weeks passed, the requests became more frequent, more urgent, and more entitled. Michael's business apparently needed immediate investment to secure a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Rebecca and Todd had put a deposit on a vacation home, assuming my help was coming. Sarah had already registered the children for expensive summer camps she couldn't afford. And then came the dinner that changed everything. Vanessa, Michael's wife, organized a casual family dinner at their house. All 3 of my children and their spouses would be there. The grandchildren would be at friends' houses. Just quality adult time. Vanessa texted. I arrived exactly on time, driving my old truck that had suddenly become a topic of conversation. Dad. Seriously, Michael said as I walked up the driveway. You could have any car in the world. Why are you still driving that thing? It gets me where I need to go, I replied. Inside, the atmosphere was tense with forced cheerfulness. Dinner was catered, the wine expensive. The conversation carefully steered away from financial topics until dessert was served. Then Todd cleared his throat. James, we've all been talking, and we think it's time to discuss your estate planning. I set down my fork. My estate planning? Yes, Rebecca jumped in. We're concerned that without proper structures in place, the government will take a huge portion of your assets when, well, eventually. We've actually prepared some options, Michael added, pulling a folder from beside his chair. Some really solid investment vehicles that would benefit the whole family while reducing tax exposure. I opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. Complex arrangements that would effectively give them control over most of my assets during my lifetime, with minimal oversight. This is quite comprehensive, I said mildly. How long have you been working on this? They exchanged glances. We just want what's best for you, Dad, Sarah said, avoiding the question. And who came up with the distribution percentages listed on page 4? I asked, more uncomfortable glances. We tried to be fair, Michael said. Based on family size, needs your family gets 40%. Rebecca's gets 35%, and Sarah's gets 25%, I noted. That's your idea of fair. Sarah only has 2 children, Vanessa pointed out. We have 3. It's proportional. I see, I said, closing the folder. And when were you planning to discuss this with me? Or was this dinner the discussion? Dad, don't be difficult. Michael sighed. We're trying to help you. Help me, I repeated, by taking control of my money. That's not fair, Rebecca protested. We're talking about protecting family assets. Family assets, I echoed. Interesting phrase for money I earned. We're your family, Sarah said, tears forming on cue. Doesn't that mean anything? I looked around the table at these people I had raised, now strangers to me in many ways. Family, I said quietly, isn't about percentages and asset distributions. It's about love, respect, and caring for each other regardless of financial circumstances. Of course it is, Todd said smoothly, but practical matters still need attention. I stood up. Thank you for dinner. I'll give your proposal the consideration it deserves. As I walked to the door, Michael followed me. Dad, don't leave like this. We need to figure this out. I turned to him. You know, Michael, for 15 years, none of you showed any interest in my financial planning. You were too busy being embarrassed by my lifestyle, excluding me from events, making jokes at my expense. Now suddenly, you're deeply concerned about my estate. That's not fair, he protested weakly. No, I agreed. It's not fair at all. I drove home in silence, my decision made. The next morning, I called Frank Martinez and set everything in motion. 3 days later, I invited all 3 children to my home. No spouses, no grandchildren, just us. They arrived separately but within minutes of each other. Michael in his Mercedes, Rebecca in her Audi, Sarah in her Range Rover. All parked in my gravel driveway that they'd been trying to convince me to pave for years. Come in, I said, when they were all assembled on my porch. We have important things to discuss. They followed me inside, looking around my living room with new eyes. The furniture they'd once seen as old and outdated was now vintage and classic. The simple decor they'd mocked was now minimalist and intentional. Please sit down, I said, gesturing to the couch and chairs. I remained standing. Dad, about the other night, Michael began. I think we got off on the wrong foot with the estate planning discussion. That's not why I asked you here, I said. We've been thinking, Rebecca jumped in, that we should respect your wishes more. If you want to stay in this house, we support that completely. Also not why I asked you here, I said. Then what is this about? Sarah asked, tension evident in her voice. I walked to my desk and picked up 3 identical folders, handing one to each of them. What's this? Michael asked, opening his set. I said, is a complete accounting of every comment, text message, email, and conversation in which you have mocked my lifestyle, been embarrassed by my choices, or tried to gain access to my money since you learned about my bank balance. They flipped through the pages with growing discomfort. You've been documenting our conversations? Rebecca asked, her voice rising. Yes, I said simply. Along with your financial records. Our what? Michael's head snapped up. Your financial records. I repeated. Michael, you're leveraged to the hilt. Your business is barely breaking even, but you're drawing a salary that would make most CEOs blush. Rebecca, you and Todd have credit card debt exceeding $120,000, mostly on luxury goods and travel. Sarah, you've been writing checks your bank account can't cash for years. How could you possibly know all this? Sarah whispered. I hired a private investigator, I said, legal, ethical, and very thorough. You spied on us. Michael stood up, his face reddening. Your own children. I investigated the people who were trying to gain control of my assets. I corrected him. There's a difference. This is insane, Rebecca said, closing her folder. Completely insane. Perhaps, I agreed, but necessary. Please turn to the last page. They did so reluctantly. What you're looking at, I explained, is a new set of terms for our relationship going forward. Terms, Sarah repeated. For our relationship, Dad, we're family, not a business deal. That's exactly what I've been trying to remind all of you, I said, but since you've chosen to treat me like a financial opportunity rather than a father, I'm responding in kind. I gestured to the document. Effective immediately, I've established the following boundaries. 1. I will not discuss my finances with any of you. 2. I will not provide loans, gifts, or investments exceeding $1,000 without a legally binding agreement. 3. I will not tolerate any further comments about my lifestyle, home, clothes, or other personal choices. And if we don't agree to these terms, Michael asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Then I will proceed with the estate plan I've already drafted with my attorney, I said, a plan that allocates 90% of my assets to various charities, with the remaining 10% divided equally among my grandchildren when they reach the age of 35. The silence that followed was deafening. You can't be serious, Rebecca finally said. I've never been more serious in my life, I replied. For 15 years, I've watched all of you chase money and status at the expense of what really matters. You've raised my grandchildren to value things over people. You've judged me for choices that brought me happiness, and the moment you discovered I had wealth, you saw me as nothing more than a checkbook. That's not true, Sarah protested, tears flowing now. We love you. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But you haven't liked me or respected me for a very long time. So this is what? Punishment, Michael demanded. Revenge for us not appreciating your lifestyle choices. No, I said firmly. This is a wake-up call. A chance for all of you to reassess what matters in life before it's too late. By threatening to disinherit us, Rebecca's voice cracked. By making you confront the people you've become, I corrected her. The people who would submit estate planning documents that give yourselves control over my assets while I'm still alive. The people who suddenly found time for weekly visits after 15 years of growing distance. The people who, in 30 days of knowing about my money, have asked for a combined total of over $4 million. They couldn't meet my eyes. I'm not asking for apologies. I continued more gently. I'm asking for change. Real, meaningful change in how you live, how you treat others, and what you value. And if we change, Sarah asked quietly, what then? Then we rebuild our relationship as a family, I said, without financial motives or judgments, without status, concerns, or materialistic values. We become what we once were, people who loved each other for who we are, not what we own. And the money, Michael couldn't help asking. The money remains mine to do with as I see fit, I said firmly. If, over time, I see genuine change, I may reconsider some aspects of my estate plan, but that won't be soon. And it won't be because you're expecting it. I opened the front door. I think we're done for today. You have a lot to think about. That's it, Michael asked. An ultimatum and then goodbye. For now, I said. The ball is in your court. They left in varying states of shock, anger, and distress. I watched their expensive cars pull away from my modest home, uncertain if I would ever see them again in the same way. But I knew I had done what Martha would have wanted, given them one last chance to find their way back to what mattered. That night, I sat on my porch swing, looking up at the stars, feeling both heavy-hearted and strangely free. The truth was out. The choices were made. Now all I could do was wait to see if my children would remember who they were raised to be. 2 weeks passed with minimal contact from my children. A few text messages asking if we could talk more about this situation. A couple of voicemails with forced cheerfulness that never mentioned our last meeting. One email from Michael with an article about repairing family relationships that seemed pulled from a self-help book. I responded politely but briefly to each communication, never initiating contact myself. This was their journey to make, not mine to force. Meanwhile, I set my plan into full motion. First, I met with Frank Martinez to finalize the changes to my estate plan. Despite what I had told my children, I hadn't actually implemented the 90/10ths split yet, but I was fully prepared to if necessary. Are you sure about this, James? Frank asked as he reviewed the documents. It's a drastic step. I'm sure about being prepared, I said. Whether I have to take this step depends on them. Next, I visited Diane Williams at First National Bank of Omaha. I need to understand exactly how my account information was shared in that group text, I explained. Diane, a professional I'd known for decades, looked mortified. Mr. Wilson, we've completed a full investigation. It appears a new employee was updating our notification system and accidentally sent test messages to actual customers. Only 3 accounts were affected. And we've already implemented safeguards to prevent this from happening again. I appreciate that, I said, but the damage is done in my case. The bank would like to offer compensation for this breach of privacy, she said, sliding a document across her desk. We value your business and understand the sensitivity of financial information. I glanced at the figure they were offering. Substantial, but hardly the point. I have a different proposal, I said, sliding her document back across the desk. I'd like to leverage this situation for something more valuable than money. What did you have in mind? She asked cautiously. I want to create a financial literacy program for families, I explained, specifically targeting the relationship between wealth, values, and generational attitudes about money. Her expression changed from caution to interest. That's not what I was expecting. The bank provides the funding and facilities. I provide the curriculum and my story as a case study. We help families avoid the pitfalls that mine has fallen into. We spent the next hour outlining the program. By the time I left her office, First National Bank of Omaha had committed $500,000 to the Wilson Family Financial Values Initiative. With me as the program director. The first workshops would begin in 3 months, enough time for my family situation to resolve one way or another. My third meeting was with Harold Thompson, the private investigator who had compiled the financial profiles of my children. I need to know if anything has changed, I told him. Any sign that they're reconsidering their spending habits or lifestyle choices? Harold shook his head. Nothing significant yet. Michael made inquiries about refinancing his mortgage. Probably looking for cash to invest in that development scheme he pitched you. Rebecca and Todd looked at another vacation property, even more expensive than the first. Sarah applied for an increase on her credit limit. I see, I said, trying to hide my disappointment. Keep monitoring. Let me know if anything changes. Will do, he replied. But James, people don't change overnight, especially when it comes to money habits. I know, I sighed, but they're my children. I have to give them a chance. The final piece of my plan required the most courage. I contacted Elaine Rogers, business editor at the Omaha Herald. We'd met years ago when she wrote a profile on Wilson Construction. James Wilson, she said warmly when we met for coffee. It's been what, 10 years? At least. I smiled. You've done well for yourself. Editor now, not just reporter. She nodded. But I doubt you asked me here to catch up on old times. No, I admitted. I have a story you might be interested in. I laid it out for her. My years of living simply, despite my wealth. the accidental text message, my children's subsequent behavior, and my new financial literacy program. That's quite a story, she said when I finished. But why go public? Why not handle this privately? 2 reasons, I explained. First, the financial literacy program needs publicity to succeed. Second, I paused, collecting my thoughts. Second, my children need to see that there are consequences for treating people differently based on perceived wealth. They need to understand that their behavior has been observed and judged not just by me, but by the community. Public accountability. Elaine nodded. Exactly, I confirmed. But I have conditions. No names for my children. No photos of them. This isn't about humiliating them, it's about teaching a lesson. I can work with that. She agreed. When do you want this to run? Hold it for now, I said. I'll let you know. This is leverage I hope I don't have to use. With all pieces in place, I sent identical text messages to Michael, Rebecca, and Sarah. Dinner at my house. Sunday at 5 p.m. Important matters to discuss. Please come alone. Their responses came quickly. Michael, I have a golf game that might run late. Can we make it 6? Rebecca, Todd and I have plans. Can he come to? Sarah, the kids have activities until 6:30. Can I bring them? I replied to each with the same message. 5 p.m. Alone. Non-negotiable. Eventually, they all confirmed they would be there. Sunday arrived with perfect Nebraska autumn weather. I spent the morning cooking Martha's pot roast recipe, mashed potatoes, green beans from my garden, and apple pie with fruit from my own trees. Simple food that had once brought our family together around the table without pretension or status concerns. I set the dining room table with the everyday dishes we'd used when the children were growing up. No fancy china or crystal, just the sturdy plates that had served thousands of family meals over the decades. At exactly 5 p.m., they arrived, Michael first, then Rebecca, finally Sarah. Each looked uncomfortable, uncertain what to expect. Come in, I said, holding the door open. Dinner's ready. They followed me to the dining room, exchanging glances when they saw the familiar table setting. Mom's pot roast, Sarah said softly, recognizing the aroma. Yes, I confirmed. I thought we could use a reminder of simpler times. We sat down. An uncomfortable silence hanging over the table as I served the food. Dad, about our last conversation, Michael finally began. We've been talking, and we think, not yet, I interrupted gently. Let's just eat first. Like we used to. For a while, we ate in silence. Then, slowly, memories began to surface. Remember when Mom would make this for every birthday dinner? Rebecca asked. Taking a bite of pot roast, and she'd always make sure, whoever's birthday it was, got the biggest piece. Sarah added with a small smile. She believed celebrations weren't about expensive gifts. I said, they were about making people feel special with thoughtful gestures. More memories emerged as we ate camping trips where we'd cooked over an open fire, family game nights around the kitchen table, Christmas mornings where handmade gifts often generated more excitement than store-bought ones. As I served the apple pie, I finally turned the conversation to the present. I asked you here tonight because decisions need to be made, I said, not just by me, but by all of you. I stood and retrieved 3 folders from the sideboard, different from the ones I'd given them at our last meeting. What are these? Michael asked warily, as I handed them out. Options, I replied simply. Open them. Inside each folder were 3 documents. I watched their faces as they reviewed the contents. These are different versions of your will, Rebecca said slowly. Yes, I confirmed. 3 possible futures. Depending on the choices you make. The first document outlined the 90/10ths split. I.D. threatened most of my estate going to charity, with small trusts for the grandchildren. The second specified a more moderate approach, half to charity, half divided among my children, but with strict conditions about financial counseling and lifestyle adjustments before any distributions. The third was the most generous. The bulk of my estate divided equally among my children, with reasonable provisions for the grandchildren's education and charitable giving. I don't understand, Sarah said. Which one are you implementing? That depends on you, I explained. On the choices you make going forward. I placed a 4th document on the table. This is an article scheduled to run in the Omaha Herald next Sunday. It tells the story of a wealthy man whose children only valued him for his money once they discovered he had it. It describes in detail how their behavior changed, how they tried to gain control of his assets, how they had mocked his lifestyle for years before knowing his true worth. You're going to publicly humiliate us, Michael's face flushed with anger. No names are mentioned, I assured him. But yes, this story will run. Unless I see genuine change from all of you. What kind of change? Rebecca demanded. What exactly do you want from us? I want you to remember who you were before status and money became your focus. I said simply. I want you to reconsider your values and priorities. I want you to teach my grandchildren that character matters more than possessions. And how are we supposed to prove that? Michael asked. What's the test here? There is no test, I replied. No checklist to complete. This isn't about performing the right behaviors to get my money. It's about genuinely reconnecting with the values your mother and I raised you with. That's so subjective. Rebecca protested. How will we know if we're meeting your expectations? If you're asking that question, you're missing the point, I said gently. This isn't about meeting my expectations to get a reward. It's about becoming people you can be proud of, regardless of financial incentives. Sarah, who had been quiet, finally spoke. The financial literacy program mentioned in this article, is that real? Yes, I confirmed. It launches in 3 months. I'm hoping all of you might eventually participate, not as my children, but as people who've learned important lessons about wealth and values. And if we don't change in whatever way you deem appropriate, Michael asked, his voice tight, you'll cut us off and embarrass us publicly. I'll implement the estate plan I believe is appropriate based on your choices. I corrected him. And I'll share a story that might help other families avoid our mistakes. Again, without naming any of you. This feels like blackmail. Rebecca said. I understand why it might feel that way, I acknowledged. But consider this. For 15 years, I was dad with limited means. And you all gradually pulled away, embarrassed by my lifestyle. For the past month, I've been dad with millions, and suddenly you're intensely interested in my life and financial planning. Neither perspective reflects who I really am or values me as your father rather than a financial asset or liability. They fell silent, unable to refute this truth. I'm not asking for apologies, I continued. I'm asking for reflection and growth. I'm asking you to remember that I'm the same person I was before you knew about the money. And that person deserves respect regardless of his bank balance. And how long do we have? Sarah asked quietly. 3 months, I said. By then, I need to finalize arrangements for the financial literacy program launch and update my estate planning. By then, I hope to see some indication that this experience has prompted meaningful reflection. I stood up. That's all I wanted to discuss tonight. Thank you for coming. They left in a subdued mood, each lost in thought. As I closed the door behind them, I felt both drained and hopeful. The first real test had been delivered. Now I would wait to see how they responded. The next few weeks brought subtle signs of change. Michael called on a Tuesday evening not to discuss business or money, but to ask if I'd help him rebuild his son's treehouse, something he'd been too busy for previously. I realized I'd been so focused on providing things for my kids that I haven't been providing myself, my time, my attention, he admitted as we worked together. The following Saturday, Rebecca invited me for a simple lunch at her house, not at a fancy restaurant where she showed me old family photos she'd been organizing. I found this one of you teaching me to ride a bike, she said, pointing to a faded photograph. I'd forgotten how patient you were, how you ran alongside me for hours until I got my balance. Sarah asked if I would watch her children for an afternoon, something she'd rarely done before, believing my house wasn't stimulating enough without the latest entertainment technology. They came home talking about the birdhouses you built together, she told me later. They didn't mention missing their tablets once. Small steps perhaps, but steps nonetheless. Meanwhile, I continued preparations for the financial literacy program. I developed curriculum materials based on my own experiences, focusing on the relationship between money and values, between wealth and worth. I wanted participants to understand that financial decisions were also moral decisions, reflecting priorities and principles that shaped not just bank accounts but family legacies. Harold reported that my children's financial behaviors were showing minor adjustments. Michael had canceled plans for a boat purchase. Rebecca had reduced her online shopping significantly. Sarah had started using a budgeting app recommended by a financial advisor. Not revolutionary changes, Harold noted, but movement in the right direction. I kept the newspaper article in reserve, neither canceling nor confirming its publication. It remained leverage I hoped not to use, but was prepared to, if necessary. 2 months after our dinner, I received an unexpected email from Michael. The subject line read simply, "Something you should see." I opened it to find a link to a new website, Wilson Family Construction. The homepage showed Michael and his 3 children in work clothes, standing in front of a partially built structure. The About Us page told the story. Founded by Michael Wilson, continuing the legacy of Wilson Construction with a new mission, teaching construction skills to disadvantaged youth while building affordable housing in our community. I called him immediately. "Is this real?" I asked when he answered. "Very real," he replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "We broke ground last week. I'm using my contracting experience to train kids from the youth center. We'll complete our first house by spring." "What prompted this?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. Honestly, watching Jason's face when we worked on that treehouse together, he was so proud to build something with his hands. It reminded me of how I felt working with you at construction sites as a kid, before I decided that success meant an office and a suit instead of a tool belt. "Michael, there's more," he interrupted. "I've scaled back my role at the firm, taking a pay cut to have more time for this new project and for the family. We're selling the boat slip. Turns out we only used the boat twice last year anyway." "I'm proud of you," I said, meaning it completely. "I'm not doing this for your approval or your money, Dad," he said seriously. "I'm doing it because it feels right, because it connects me to what matters." For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to the sun. I remembered. Similar revelations followed with my daughters. Rebecca invited me to coffee to show me a business plan for a small art gallery she was opening in a renovated downtown building. I majored in art history before Todd convinced me to switch to business, she reminded me. "I've always wanted to support local artists, create a community space. What does Todd think?" I asked cautiously. "He's adjusting," she admitted. "We've had some difficult conversations about priorities, about measuring success. We've started marriage counseling. Actually." She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I realized I'd become someone my younger self wouldn't recognize. Someone focused on impressing others instead of expressing myself. Sarah's transformation was perhaps the most surprising. She'd enrolled in nursing school. "Remember when I wanted to be a nurse in high school?" she asked when she told me the news. Before I met Jason and got caught up in his world of status and appearances. "I remember." I nodded. "You used to volunteer at the hospital. It's going to take 3 years," she continued. "Part-time while the kids are in school. We've moved to a smaller house to make it financially possible. The kids are sharing rooms now, and you know what? They're actually enjoying it, building forts between their beds, having late-night conversations." "And Jason?" I asked. "He's trying," she said. "It's been an adjustment for him, for all of us, but I think he sees that I'm happier now, more purposeful." As the 3-month mark approached, I made my decision. I called Frank Martinez and gave him final instructions on my estate plan. I contacted Elaine Rogers about the newspaper article, and I invited all 3 children and their families to dinner at my house. This time, I asked them to bring their spouses and children. This time, we would gather as a complete family for the first time in years. The evening began with chaos as grandchildren explored the backyard, exclaiming over the new playground equipment I'd built by hand. The adults helped prepare dinner in my kitchen, a cooperative effort that would have been unthinkable months earlier. After dinner, as the children played board games in the living room, I addressed the adults. 3 months ago, I gave you all a challenge," I began. "Not a test with right or wrong answers, but an invitation to reflection and change." I looked at each of them in turn. "I've seen remarkable transformations from all of you. New businesses focused on meaning rather than status. Career changes that honor your authentic interests. Financial decisions that reflect values beyond material accumulation. We've been trying, Dad," Michael said. "I know," I acknowledged. "And not just for show, but in ways that demonstrate genuine recommitment to the values you were raised with." I handed each of my children an envelope. "What's this?" Rebecca asked. "The future," I replied. "Open them." Inside each envelope was a letter detailing my final estate plan, the most generous version, with equal distributions among my children and provisions for the grandchildren. Also included was a contribution to each of their new ventures, capital for Michael's community construction program, startup funds for Rebecca's gallery, tuition coverage for Sarah's nursing degree. "Dad, we can't accept this," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "We're making these changes for ourselves, not for your money." "I know," I smiled. "That's precisely why I'm confident. This is the right decision now." I handed them each a second document, a printed copy of the newspaper article that would run the following Sunday. "You're still publishing it?" Michael asked. scanning the text. "Read it carefully," I suggested. They did, expressions changing as they realized what they were seeing. The article had been completely rewritten. Now it told the story of a family that had lost its way but found it again. It described how an accidental text message had revealed not just hidden wealth but hidden character flaws, and how that revelation had ultimately led to personal growth and recommitment to authentic values. "This is surprisingly positive," Rebecca said, looking up. "Because you made surprisingly positive changes," I replied. "This story now has a happy ending, one you all created through difficult but meaningful choices." "So we passed the test?" Michael asked. "There was never a test," I reminded him, "only an opportunity for reflection and growth, an opportunity you all embraced in your own ways." Later that evening, as the family prepared to leave, I found myself surrounded by grandchildren wanting goodnight hugs, genuine affection that had been missing in recent years. My children embraced me with a warmth and respect I hadn't felt from them in too long. As the last car pulled away, I sat on my porch swing in the gathering darkness. Martha would have been proud, I thought, not of my tactics. Perhaps she had always been more direct than strategic, but of the results. Our children had found their way back to the values we had tried to instill in them. The grandchildren were being raised with a healthier perspective on wealth and worth, and I had reclaimed my place in the family, not as a source of embarrassment or a source of funding, but as a father and grandfather worthy of respect regardless of his bank balance or lifestyle choices. The money, in the end, had been both the problem and, paradoxically, part of the solution. It had exposed character flaws but also created leverage for meaningful change. It had revealed true priorities but also funded new beginnings aligned with better values. I rocked gently on the porch swing, feeling at peace for the first time in months. Tomorrow, I would review the final materials for the financial literacy program. Perhaps our family's journey would help others avoid similar pitfalls, or find their way back from materialistic detours. For tonight, though, I was simply grateful that the accidental text message, that $18 million revelation, that could have permanently fractured our family, had instead become the catalyst for healing and renewal. Some lessons come at a high price, but as I had learned through a lifetime of simple living amid hidden wealth, the most valuable things rarely have anything to do with money at all. The financial literacy program launched on a bright spring morning with more attendees than the bank had anticipated. Extra chairs were brought into the community room to accommodate the overflow crowd, a mix of families, financial professionals, and community leaders curious about this new initiative. I stood at the podium, surveying the audience. In the front row sat Michael and his family, Rebecca and Todd, Sarah and Jason with their children. Behind them were neighbors, friends, and even a few former employees from Wilson Construction. Frank Martinez and Harold Thompson had come to show support. Elaine Rogers from the Omaha Herald sat with a notebook open, preparing to cover the event. "Welcome, everyone," I began. "The Wilson Family Financial Values Initiative began with a mistake, a banking error that accidentally revealed my financial status to family members who had, for years, believed I lived on a limited income." Murmurs rippled through the audience. The article had run 2 weeks earlier, generating significant local interest. That revelation could have destroyed my family, I continued. Instead, it became the catalyst for important conversations about wealth, values, and how money shapes our relationships and identities. For the next hour, I outlined the program workshops on family financial communication, courses on aligning spending with personal values, resources for teaching children healthy money attitudes, community projects that would put these principles into practice. "This isn't about investment strategies or maximizing returns," I explained. "There are plenty of programs that teach those skills. This is about something more fundamental, the relationship between our financial choices and our personal values, between what we have and who we are." To my surprise, Michael stood up and asked to speak. He joined me at the podium, looking confident but humbled. "6 months ago, I was embarrassed by my father's lifestyle," he admitted to the audience. "I couldn't understand why someone with means would choose to live so simply. I pushed him to upgrade, to show his success through his possessions. I now realize I was the one who had lost perspective." He described his new construction training program, explaining how teaching disadvantaged youth had reconnected him with the satisfaction of building something tangible and meaningful. Rebecca spoke next, sharing how she had sacrificed personal passions for status symbols that ultimately left her feeling empty. "My gallery opens next month," she announced. "It's in a renovated warehouse downtown, nothing fancy, but it has beautiful light and affordable spaces for local artists who need visibility. Todd and I are learning to measure success differently now. Sarah described her nursing program and the challenges of balancing studies with parenting. We've simplified our lives considerably, she acknowledged. Smaller house, fewer activities, more family time. The kids complained at first, but now they're thriving with less stuff and more attention. As my children spoke, I watched the audience's reactions, the nods of recognition, the thoughtful expressions. These were universal struggles, particularly in a culture that often equated worth with wealth, success with possessions. After the formal presentation, people lingered for refreshments and conversation. Community leaders approached to discuss expanding the program. Financial advisors offered to volunteer their expertise. Parents asked about resources for teaching children about money without creating materialism. Harold Thompson found me by the coffee service. Quite a turnaround, he observed, nodding toward my children, who were engaged in animated conversations with attendees. Beyond anything I expected, I admitted. You know, he said thoughtfully, in my line of work, I rarely see family conflicts resolve this positively. Usually, money disputes end in permanent fractures. We came close to that outcome, I acknowledged. What made the difference, do you think? I considered his question. Time, perhaps. I gave them space to reflect rather than forcing immediate compliance. And purpose, helping them reconnect with meaningful pursuits beyond consumption and status. And consequences. Harold added with a knowing look. You were willing to establish clear boundaries. That too, I agreed. Elaine Rogers approached with her notebook. This will make an excellent follow-up to our original article, she said. Mind if I ask a few questions? Not at all, I replied. The program seems to be generating significant interest, she noted. Do you think that's because many families struggle with these issues? Absolutely, I said. Money is simultaneously the most discussed and least discussed topic in many families. We talk endlessly about earning it and spending it, but rarely about the values and priorities it reflects, or how it affects our relationships and identities. And your family? She asked. The article mentions significant changes in their lifestyles and priorities. Has that continued? I glanced over at my children. Michael was showing a community leader photos of his youth construction project. Rebecca was discussing her gallery plans with an arts administrator. Sarah was explaining her nursing program to a former client of mine. The changes are real, I confirmed. Not perfect, we're all still works in progress, but meaningful and sustained. Any regrets about how you handled the situation? Elaine asked. I considered this carefully. I wish it hadn't taken a banking error and the threat of disinheritance to prompt these conversations. I wish I'd found better ways to communicate my values while Martha was still alive, but I don't regret creating consequences for disrespectful behavior, even with adult children. Later that afternoon, as the event wound down, my family gathered at my house for a casual dinner. The grandchildren played in the backyard while the adults prepared the meal together, a new tradition we'd established over recent months. We sat around my dining room table, the same simple table where we'd shared thousands of family meals over decades. I looked at each face and felt profound gratitude, not just for the changes they'd made, but for the authenticity that had returned to our relationships. I have something to show you all, I said after dinner, retrieving a box from my office. Inside were documents. The original, severe version of my will that would have left them minimal inheritance. The newspaper article draft that would have exposed their materialistic behavior. The financial investigations that had documented their precarious spending patterns. I'm shredding all of these, I explained. They served their purpose as leverage for change. But we don't need them anymore. Maybe keep one copy, Michael suggested unexpectedly, not to use against us, but as a reminder of how easily we lost our way and how we found it again. I have a better idea, I said. I handed each of my children an envelope containing college fund information for their children. Generous but not extravagant provisions for educational expenses. This is the only financial gift I'm giving you now, I explained. The rest remains in my estate for the future, but I want you to know that your inheritance is secure, not because you've performed according to my expectations, but because you've reconnected with your own authentic values. That's worth more than the money. Sarah said softly. It is, I agreed. And that understanding is exactly why I'm confident about this decision now. Rebecca raised her glass. To Dad, who taught us the hard way that net worth and self-worth are very different things. And to Mom, Michael added, who would be proud of all of us right now. We clinked glasses in a toast that represented more than celebration. It was a recommitment to the values that Martha and I had tried to instill from their earliest years, values that had been temporarily obscured by materialism and status concerns, but had never completely disappeared. In the months that followed, our family relationships continued to strengthen. The financial literacy program expanded to other bank branches, then to community centers and schools across Nebraska. Michael's construction training program completed its first affordable home. Rebecca's gallery opened to positive reviews. Sarah excelled in her nursing studies. The grandchildren learned new lessons about money and values from parents who were modeling different priorities. Now, vacations became simpler but more meaningful. Celebrations focused on experiences rather than expensive gifts. Family game nights and shared meals replaced status-driven activities. My simple house became the gathering place it had been when Martha was alive, not because anything about it had changed, but because perceptions had shifted. What had once seemed embarrassingly modest to my status-conscious children now represented intentional priorities and authentic choices. One evening, about a year after the accidental text message that had changed everything, I sat on my porch with Michael, watching his children play with the neighbors' kids in my front yard. "You know what's funny, Dad?" he said. "I'm actually happier now, working with my hands again, teaching these kids skills, spending evenings with the family instead of at client dinners. I feel more myself." "Your mother used to say that happiness isn't having what you want, but wanting what you have," I replied. "She was right about most things." He smiled. "Most things," I agreed. Looking back, Michael said thoughtfully, "I think what bothered me about your lifestyle wasn't that you lived simply. It was that your choices were a constant reminder that mine were taking me further from what really mattered." I nodded, understanding completely. "The money's still there," I reminded him. "It hasn't gone anywhere, but it's in proper perspective now. A tool rather than a measure of worth. A tool we're using better." He agreed, as darkness fell and fireflies began to dot the yard. I thought about the strange journey we'd taken, how a banking error had exposed not just my hidden wealth but my children's hidden values, confusion, how the accidental revelation of my financial status had created an opportunity for course correction that might never have happened otherwise. They had mocked me for living simply until the bank mistakenly sent my $18 million balance to the family group chat. That moment could have permanently fractured our family. Instead, it had ultimately healed us. Money, I reflected, reveals character far more often than it changes it. My children had always had the capacity for authenticity, purpose, and genuine connection. They had simply lost their way in a culture that constantly confuses price with value, possessions with worth. The text message had been the wake-up call. The potential consequences had provided motivation for reflection, but the real change had come from within each of them, a recommitment to values that had been temporarily overshadowed but never truly forgotten. As my grandchildren's laughter filled the evening air, I silently thanked that anonymous bank employee whose error had set this entire journey in motion. Sometimes the most valuable revelations come in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes, what looks like a family crisis can become, with time and wisdom, the foundation for a family renaissance. My $18 million had finally accomplished something truly valuable, and it had nothing to do with the money itself. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to our channel. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from and what you thought of the tale. To hear another story of family, justice, and redemption, click the video on the left.